Ladies and gentlemen, it is that time of year again. I'm going to be going through my top 5 most disappointing college football teams for the 2024 regular season. These are all teams that were ranked at the beginning of the year, but for whatever reason, whether it's injury, whether it's poor coaching, whether it's just simply being overrated, these teams did not live up to expectations. Beginning with number 5 on the list, and it is Utah. Now, Utah entered the college football season with a preseason ranking of number 12. They were kind of like the token pick to win the Big 12 and get that auto bid, possibly be the fourth overall seed in the college football playoff. They've never really had crazy talent. They got Cam Rising back for a 12th season, but he got injured again, and they simply just did not play very well against teams that are really beatable. But this is unfortunately what can happen when you have a team that's more fundamental based and you can't out-talent teams. You're going to be involved in a lot of close games, and they had a horrible offense. Cam Rising, even if he didn't get injured, I think this is a team that probably loses 3 games and misses the playoff anyways. They lost to a terrible, terrible Houston team. They had a massive losing streak throughout much of the regular season, and they ended up straight up missing a bowl, finishing 5-7 on the year. So very disappointing. The reason they're not higher, you would think, well, if they were ranked 12th and everyone was picking them to make the playoff, why would they not be higher on the most disappointing list considering they missed a bowl? It's mainly because they're just not a team that has a ton of talent anyways. So the idea that they would go 5-7, while it's surprising, it's really not shocking to me, especially dealing with the quarterback injury, taking that into account. By the way, Zach Wilson's young brother Isaac did start for much of the year, and it went about as well as you would expect. Although Zach Wilson, to be fair, was a really good college quarterback at BYU. Also, it's just funny how meaningless early season games can be. Week number 4, Utah goes on the road at Oklahoma State, ranked v. ranked. They win that game, and everyone thinks Utah's this great team. Turns out both teams were just terrible considering they went on massive losing streaks. I think Oklahoma State lost every single game to finish the regular season. And by the way, Oklahoma State is not on this list, although they very easily could be. It's like, do you want to pick Utah or Oklahoma State? Utah was kind of more highly thought of in the preseason, so that's why I went with Utah in terms of number 5. Moving on to number 4, it is Oklahoma. So Oklahoma entered the season initially with a ranking of number 16. It was their first year in the SEC. It was a major step up in competition, unless you're Texas, of course. We know how easy their schedule was. But Oklahoma, they really finished the season a total disaster, and they've got like 6 receivers in the portal. This was kind of a prove-it Brett Venables year, and he certainly did not. You've also got your 5-star quarterback, Jackson Arnold, who kind of showed out last year at the end of the season in the Alamo Bowl, having a pretty odd year where he gets benched, then he comes back. They did beat Alabama. That was the clear highlight of their season. That was their last home game. They won that game 24-3, but you lose to Tennessee. You get crushed in the rivalry against Texas. You get crushed at home by South Carolina. This was a team that had some crazy injuries, to be fair, but still, the way the season went, your first year in the SEC, you would at least hope you would have a solid 8-4 with a young 5-star quarterback that would be developing, leading into his great junior year, and it certainly did not work out. And this is an Oklahoma program. They're used to winning, and they haven't won much the last few years. Brett Venables is on the clock. We'll see what they do. They still do recruit well, but with the transfers that they've lost, which some of the reports coming out, the practices, possibly playing players while they were injured. I understand it's tough considering they had a load of injuries, and when they lost to Texas and South Carolina, they really were a depleted team. But still, for them to finish with the record that they had, with how storied their program is, especially first year in the SEC, not good considering they had a decent amount of hype being ranked inside the top 20 with Jackson Arnold, the 5-star quarterback, who he threw 12 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, but the QBR was not good. The efficiency was really bad. He kind of turned into like this dual threat runner, and he'll be an interesting quarterback, as he enters the portal, but I would say Oklahoma was a big disappointment. Moving on to the number 3 most disappointing team, it is Michigan. Now, this one's a real mixed bag. You could make an argument before the Ohio State game that Michigan should be number 1, considering this is a national champion that was ranked inside of the top 10, that was unranked by like week 7. But for Michigan, they did beat Ohio State. That does count for a lot considering how big that rivalry is. But Sharon Moore, I mean, they just didn't have a quarterback. And I'm shocked they really didn't foresee this and try and at least go out and get someone that could lead them to maybe 8 or 9 wins. I mean, they had an amazing defensive roster in terms of overall talent. Will Johnson, I thought, was kind of overrated throughout the entire season, and then he just checked out with an injury and kind of opted out of the rest of the regular season. But they had a very talented defensive line. Their early loss to Texas let us know that they weren't going to be anything special. They did win a game against USC where their highest passer threw for 32 yards, Alex Orji, 32 passing yards. They won that game. So congratulations to them. This year could have went a lot worse for them. They had very close wins against USC. That USC game they probably should have lost. They were outgained by a lot of yards. The game at home against Minnesota, they only won by 3. They beat Michigan State by 7. That was a game they were losing in the first half. And then they had the very close win on the road, of course, against Ohio State, where they were around 20-point underdogs. They could have easily went 5-7, but they do end up 7-5. Unfortunately for them, they've got an annoying matchup with Alabama, and we'll see who Alabama plays in that bowl game. But I would be pretty angry if I was Michigan. Like, you had this great win against Ohio State. Your team is still not very good. I mean, Davis Warren had 62 passing yards in the win against Ohio State. You would at least want to face another, maybe like a crappy ACC team that's 7-5, but they get Alabama. And even a depleted Alabama team, I think, will easily handle Michigan. So Michigan, it's kind of like a mixed bag, but this is a team that won a national title. They went 15-0. I know they lost Harbaugh. I know they lost Corum. I know they lost J.J. McCarthy, but still, people were expecting 9-3, 10-2, something along those lines, and it did not work out at all, really, from the start of the season. Even against Fresno State, that was a close game until Will Johnson got a pick 6 late to seal it. So Michigan was very disappointing, especially based on the defensive talent that they had. Their defense really didn't play as well as some of their past defenses have, which is surprising considering they've got multiple first-round picks just on that defensive line alone. Moving on to the number 2 most disappointing team, it is USC. So USC entered the rankings as the number 23 team overall, although that really doesn't put into context the hype surrounding them, considering they beat the number 13 team in a neutral site game, LSU, 27-20, and they immediately catapulted inside of the top 15. That week 3 loss to Michigan, I think, ruined their season. This is a really unfortunate year for Lincoln Riley. Very, very close losses. You had a 3-point loss on the road at Michigan. You had a 7-point loss on the road at Minnesota. You lost in overtime to Penn State when you had that team beat. They had Penn State like at a 4th and 8 dead to rights late in regulation of that game, and they end up losing in OT. They lost to Maryland by 1 point. They lost to Washington by 5 points. Unfortunately, a lot of close losses for Lincoln Riley, but the reason they're number 2 in terms of most disappointing is because you look at Miller Moss, you look at last season, what did they play in the Holiday Bowl? He throws for like 400 yards, has a bunch of touchdowns. You think, all right, this is a team that's coming back. They had a great opportunity on the road against a Michigan team that we know was not very good. You lose that game. You lose all of these one-score games. And now you look at a USC team that really has an identity crisis. They were a team coming into this year. The first few games, the narrative was the defense is fixed. Well, it certainly got better, but now it's almost becoming an offensive problem, and USC really not having a potent rushing attack. It's just a weird situation for Lincoln Riley right now. Even though you're in California, you would think some great recruiting ground, the NIL, the booster spending money to get Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma in the first place. I'm interested to see what happens with this program, but what a letdown. This team very easily could have been 9-3 or 10-2. A lot of people don't know that. They did have the loss to Notre Dame at the end of the regular season, but even in that game, they had like 500 yards of total offense. But either way, USC, a very much of a letdown of a year considering you lose 6 games. They are number 2, and that was their first year in the Big Ten. And then moving on to the most disappointing team in college football in the 2024 regular season, of course it has to be Florida State's. No other team comes close. Florida State started the preseason ranked number 10 in the country. They won 2 games. Yes, they won 2 games. One of those games being against an FCS team. The second to last game of the season. They got thumped by Clemson. They got thumped by SMU. They got thumped by Miami. They got thumped by North Carolina. They got destroyed by Notre Dame. They got thumped by Florida. They easily lost to Boston College. You remember the week 0 game? What was it, in Ireland? Everyone was making a huge deal about Georgia Tech beating them. Well, that ended up being a bad win for Georgia Tech. Think about how amazing that is. That's early season college football for you. Everyone makes this huge reaction. Oh my goodness, FSU went 13-0 last year, and then they got destroyed in the bowl game. But Georgia Tech beats them. What a great win for Georgia Tech. Well, looking back retroactive, Georgia Tech winning that game by 3, that's a terrible win. You should have beaten FSU by more considering how bad they were. But yeah, we'll see what happens with Florida State. There's really nothing else to say. It was horrible. And for a program that you would think has, pretty high standard to where you look at other teams like a USC or a Michigan, even in their down years, you're at least kind of fighting for a bowl. To go 2-10 as a program that has been one of the better ones at least the past few decades and wants to be considered in the same realm as some of the top elite teams, you simply cannot lose double-digit games in a season. It is absolutely unacceptable. Now, the good news is it's only one season, but still, 10 losses, that's going to cripple your culture. The good thing for them is they've got the transfer portal. They could totally remake their roster if they decide to do so, although it's not going to be easy. There's going to have to be a major NIL investment. But either way, guys, those are the top 5 most disappointing college football teams of 2024. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.